Hello and welcome to Unacademy, the one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics. But before that, I have a very important announcement. During the recent results that were announced by UPSC, our Unacademy learners have performed phenomenally well. 585 plus learners have been able to top the exam, and out of them, 110 plus students were from Unacademy's classroom program who had taken the paid subscription of Unacademy's online classes. All India rank 1 Anuj Agnihotri was one such classroom student. So the other students who are in the top 100 and as well as in the final list, they had even accessed free classes on Unacademy's platform, and some of them availed the interview guidance program. So, to celebrate this spectacular success of Unacademy students, we are providing the best possible offer to help the students who are looking to prepare for 2027 and beyond. So, Unacademy would be providing all the subscription courses at a flat 60% off, and you can avail the subscription at just 16,999. Along with this, you will also get double validity. That is, if you take a 6-month subscription, you get 6-month subscription free. Same for 12, 18, and 24-month subscription. You also get CSE Assure. So if you take a subscription of 18 months and above, and under CSE Assure, let's say you don't clear the exam in your first attempt for some reason, then your next attempt is entirely on us. So to avail this special offer, you need to ensure that you enter the code IAS English. When you click on the link, you might see a different price on the subscription page. So to avail the discount and the offer, you have to enter the code IAS English. So those interested, please check out the details given in the link in the description box below. And I'm told the offer will end tomorrow on the 13th of March. So with this, let's begin by looking at the topics that we are going to discuss today. In today's Delhi edition of the Hindu, there are multiple articles that are important. There are easily 15 plus articles that are important, which we are going to discuss. So I'm sorting them into 10 topics. That is, if you look at topic number 4 and 5, there are multiple articles in the newspaper related to the same development. Then on page 1 to 14, there are multiple articles related to the Harish Rana case. On page 8 and 16, multiple articles related to Nepal's elections. So in total, we have 15 plus articles today, but I'll club them into around 10 topics and cover the paper comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So let's begin and look at the first topic. The Supreme Court of India has delivered a landmark ruling in the Harish Rana case. The Harish Rana case dealt with the topic of euthanasia. So in this discussion, we will go beyond the newspaper articles and understand this topic in complete detail. What is euthanasia? What's the legal standpoint in India? What's the difference between active and passive euthanasia? What is the Harish Rana case all about? And what's the legal background and the jurisprudence that has developed in India with regard to the topic of euthanasia? So euthanasia is essentially taking away the life of someone with external assistance. Ending the life with assistance. A deliberate ending of someone's life with external assistance is what is often referred to as euthanasia, a form of assisted suicide. But however, this issue raises very serious legal and ethical questions. And when you look at euthanasia, there are two types that are considered. One is active euthanasia and the other is passive euthanasia. In active euthanasia, there is an active external intervention. The person who wants to end their life may not exactly be suffering from a life-threatening, terminally ill condition. The patient may not be in a vegetative state. The person may not be even suffering from any terminally ill conditions. But if someone wants to end their life, if there is an active external intervention in the form of, let's say, a lethal injection, which is medically administered, which is legally allowed to take away the life of someone with external assistance, such direct intervention to disrupt the natural order of death is what is referred to as active euthanasia. There are few countries in the world where active euthanasia is legally allowed. Now, can you find out the names of these countries where active euthanasia is legally allowed and permitted? The person may not be suffering from any health condition. If they wish to take away their life, there are few countries in the world where this is allowed. But in most countries, active euthanasia raises very serious legal ethical questions and it is not permitted. In India, active euthanasia remains illegal. Any form of assisted suicide remains illegal in our country. But however, when it comes to passive euthanasia, India has recently opened up, and the Harish Rana case will go down in history as a landmark case in the context of passive euthanasia. In passive euthanasia, there is a passive involvement of the doctors who basically withhold or withdraw the life support, the artificial life support system, which is supporting a terminally ill patient who might be in a vegetative state. I mean, if there is no medical intervention, that patient is likely to pass away naturally, but they will suffer a very painful, agonizing death. And you're going to prolong that suffering for the patient and as well as for the immediate family members. So, if the legal framework, the constitutional framework allows for this, and sufficient safeguards and checks and balances are put in place to prevent its misuse, then passive euthanasia could help in upholding the right to die with dignity. So, withdrawal of artificial life support or withholding the life support system when a patient is in a vegetative state, going through a terminally ill condition, which is incurable, where death is inevitable. In such circumstances, under specific conditions, with strict regulation, allowing someone to pass away in a humane manner with minimal suffering, minimal pain, would not only bring relief to that individual and secure their fundamental right to die with dignity, it would also give immense relief to the family members as well. Now, this is a very sensitive and very emotional subject. In fact, when the case was heard yesterday and the final ruling was passed, the whole court hall was in stunned silence. The judges themselves, you could see that they were a little emotional when they were dealing with the Harish Rana case. That is the sensitivity of this particular issue. So, before we proceed further to understand the topic of right to die with dignity, let's understand what is Harish Rana case. Harish Rana, a young student in the Punjab University, back in 2013, he suffered a tragic accident at his PG, where he was residing as a student. He fell from the fourth floor of his PG building and he suffered very, very serious injuries. He was basically pushed into a vegetative comatose state. He lost all his basic functions and he has not been able to basically lead a normal life anymore. It's purely the love of his parents who have been able to take care of him over the last many years. But it has placed an immense emotional burden on the family as well to see their son in this state, in this condition. So it is this pain and agony of the patient and as well as the family members which raises the demand for allowing passive euthanasia, which provides for a humane death. Because Harish Rana slipped into a vegetative comatose state and he has been basically surviving on clinically assisted nutrition and hydration support. Without this external support, Harish Rana would not have been able to survive for so long. But since passive euthanasia and the legal framework surrounding it was not very clear, there was a need for a court intervention to allow for the withdrawal of this life support. Though in 2018, the Supreme Court had delivered a landmark verdict and created guidelines for passive euthanasia in the country, it had introduced a framework back in 2018 itself. This was further refined and simplified in 2023. But despite this, passive euthanasia has never been practiced in India because, see, there is a lot of complexity involved in implementing the guidelines in the framework which is already available. So we will discuss all the details in a short while. But coming back to the Harish Rana case, the parents' appeal was essentially to allow their son to exercise his right to die with dignity. So the Supreme Court was evaluating this constitutional matter, the fundamental right under Article 21 that secures right to life and to lead a life with dignity. Does this encompass the right to die with dignity as well? That was the question which had to be interpreted. So the Supreme Court, headed by a bench headed by Justice Pradiwala and the other judge, both have opined that it's only humane to allow such exceptional cases where withdrawal of life support can be permitted with proper strict regulation that allows for the individual to exercise the right to die with dignity. And this is seen as part of one's right to life and to lead a life with dignity. So, leading a life with dignity extends to losing your life with dignity, especially when you're suffering from a terminally ill condition where there is no cure, where death is at the doorstep and life is being withheld only because of the artificial medical intervention which is happening from the outside. Thanks to advances in medical science and technology, with the support of artificial life systems, you can prolong the life maybe by few weeks, few months, few years. But such a life is simply painful and extremely agonizing for the individual and for the immediate family members as well. So, in this context, Harish Rana's case will probably become the first ever case of passive euthanasia in India. So, as per the Supreme Court orders, Harish Rana would now be shifted to AIIMS Delhi, where doctors have said they'll oblige with the orders of the court, meaning they will withdraw the life support system, allowing Harish Rana to pass away naturally. So, this brings us to the topic of taking one's own life. What is the legal framework surrounding this? Now, when you look at suicide per se, the act of attempting a suicide in India remained a criminal offense for a very long time. This was a result of the British era laws that we had inherited. Under the IPC, the Indian Penal Code, section 309, it had criminalized the act of committing suicide, the act of taking one's own life. But in 1994, the Supreme Court carried out a big intervention in the P. Rathinam case versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court declared that committing suicide, the attempt to suicide, should not be treated as a criminal offense, and it pushed for decriminalization of attempted suicide. Here, the Supreme Court argued that it could be seen as a violation of the fundamental rights, and the right to lead a life with dignity essentially encompasses the right to die as well. But this interpretation had generated a huge uproar as it was not seen as socially, ethically acceptable. And in 1996, the Supreme Court reversed this judgment in the Gyan Kaur versus State of Punjab. In this judgment, it was reversed and attempt to suicide was again recriminalized. So Section 309 of IPC, it continued to remain valid until recently. In 2017, under the Mental Health Care Act, India took a very, very big step when suicide was classified as a mental issue, as a mental health care issue, which eventually led to its decriminalization. So, under the new set of criminal laws, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which replaced the Indian Penal Code, the criminal provision that would be attracted in case of attempt to suicide has been removed entirely. So, attempt to suicide has now been decriminalized. So, that is one issue on the other side. Now, coming to the topic of euthanasia, since the jurisprudence and the court rulings previously was in favor of the state's right to preserve one's life, to uphold the right to life under Article 21, the topic of euthanasia itself was seen as a big taboo topic in India. The first time the issue was properly discussed, debated, and taken up for judicial scrutiny was in the landmark case of Aruna Shanbag. Aruna Shanbag's case is a very tragic case. Aruna Shanbag, a young nurse from Karnataka who was working in Maharashtra, she was raped in the hospital by the ward boy. Following this horrific rape and sexual assault incident, Aruna Shanbag slipped into a comatose state and she continued to live for 42 years. So, in this vegetative state, she survived purely because of the artificial life support system which was supporting her. So, the caretakers and the well wishers finally approached the court. And in 2011, the Aruna Shanbag case attracted national and even global attention because it dealt with the sensitive topic of euthanasia, where the right to die with dignity was being debated. The matter was eventually heard by a constitution bench of the Supreme Court. And the constitution bench of the Supreme Court in the Aruna Shanbag case decided to allow passive euthanasia, but with very, very strict conditions. Under very specific conditions, passive euthanasia was allowed for the first time in the year 2011. But however, this was not implemented because Aruna Shanbag eventually passed away naturally without invoking her right to die with dignity. Then came the Common Cause case of 2018. A civil society group, Common Cause, approached the court, Common Cause versus Union of India, which ended up becoming a landmark judgment. In the Common Cause case in 2018, the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court ruled that right to die with honor and dignity is an extension of Article 21 that guarantees right to life and to lead a life with dignity. So through this ruling, the Supreme Court laid down specific criterias and created a framework to regulate passive euthanasia in the country. So under this framework, the Supreme Court identified specific conditions for terminally ill patients, those who are in vegetative state, those who have no other option of seeing any improvement in their health condition. And two medical boards would be set up to review the case. Two independent medical boards would review it only when approved by the two medical boards with proper consent obtained, either by the patient if possible or by the immediate kin and family members. Only then would the doctors proceed to withdraw life support and the artificial life support systems, which are basically sustaining the life of the patient. So once it is withdrawn, the patient will naturally pass away within probably few minutes to few hours because they would be suffering from a terminally ill condition and they would be in a vegetative state, completely supported by the external life support systems. Now, this ruling, the Common Cause case, also introduced the concept of a living will, where individuals can provide advanced medical directives when they are still alive, when you're still healthy. This is something which is not well known across the country. Just like you write a will for your assets, your entitlements to pass it on to the further generations. In a similar manner, a living will can be written by a healthy living individual as to what will happen if at all they reach this unfortunate state, right? See, eventually, death is a reality. At some stage in our lives, you will encounter this tragic situation where you may not be in a right state, where you might be incompetent to take the decision because of your physical or mental health and well-being. So it will put the family members in a difficult position to take the call. So individuals can now exercise a living will, which is essentially an advanced medical directive where you authorize on your own that if at all you reach such a stage, a vegetative state, in a terminally ill condition, where the condition cannot be reversed medically, and if the medical board certify that there's no way the life can be saved apart from prolonging the life through artificial life support systems, in such a scenario, you'll authorize the doctors to withdraw your artificial life support. So this was recognized by the Supreme Court. And in 2023, these regulations were further simplified. The Supreme Court has further simplified these regulations and the conditions in 2023. So now through the Harish Rana case, the Supreme Court is reiterating that a person has the right to die with dignity when faced with such traumatic conditions, which will end the pain and agony, not just for the individual, but as well as for the family members. Now, In this ruling, in the Harish Rana case, the Supreme Court has drawn a clear distinction between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. More importantly, Justice Pardiwala has observed that the term passive euthanasia itself is outdated and obsolete. Now, let me clarify this and explain this a little further. So, as we understood, in active euthanasia, there is an external intervention where there is a overt and active intervention which disrupts the natural order of death. Even a healthy individual, right? Let's say a person who has no uh, injuries or no terminally ill condition, he's not in a vegetative state, he's perfectly fine and healthy, but maybe the person doesn't wish to live anymore, right? Could be because of mental stress, the mental issues and the disorders related to it. But if the person wishes to lose someone's their own life, in active euthanasia, there is an active intervention which is done through a lethal injection. This, of course, is not allowed in India and most countries, as we discussed. It's allowed only in few specific countries. Whereas in passive euthanasia, the life is not being taken per se. In either ways, the person is going to pass away eventually, right? Either ways, the withdrawal of medical support or continuation of the medical support, either cases will not result in improvement of the person's condition. See, doctors face multiple dilemmas when executing these decisions, because on one hand, doctors have a oath, they have a commitment to save life at any cost, to put in every possible effort till the last minute. So withdrawing life support, it in itself raises an ethical dilemma for medical practitioners. Then, of course, there are legal complications involved. Now, let's say family members who have to take the call, they hesitate, or there is a divide within the family where some agree that let's withdraw the life support, let the person pass away peacefully, whereas others may disapprove of it, especially the more orthodox people who may have religious, cultural beliefs which you can't dismiss. And any such complication comes up within the family, doctors will take a back step, because tomorrow they'll fear a medico legal complication and they'll fear that criminal cases will be filed against them. So, as a result, though passive euthanasia was legalized in 2011, 2018, proper guidelines were created, it was simplified in 2023, it has not been implemented, not been enforced. One is due to lack of awareness. Even medical practitioners themselves are not completely aware of the legal landscape which is there today, plus the complications involved. So now the Supreme Court has drawn clear distinction and it's saying the term passive euthanasia is old and obsolete. Instead, a better term is withdrawal of life support. Withdrawing the life support which is sustaining the person's life is a better term, as passive euthanasia often results in a comparison with active euthanasia. So the Supreme Court is completely avoiding the term euthanasia in the Harish Rana case. It doesn't want to refer to the term euthanasia, which refers to both active and passive euthanasia. It could lead to a rigid response from the society as well, especially when there is an active intervention involved, though it's not legally allowed. Still, the terminology finds no relevance according to the court. It has said passive euthanasia as a term is obsolete, it's outdated. So the Supreme Court is now referring to this as withdrawal of life support. And if patients have a living will that they have executed when they were in the right state of mind and given advanced medical directives to their family members, that can be presented to the doctors. And if the medical boards determine that the patient can't be saved anymore, then in that case, the life support system can be withdrawn, allowing the person to exercise their right to die with dignity. Now, this right to die with dignity conflicts with the interest of the state and the mandate of the state to preserve life. Since Article 21 is a fundamental right, it's a state which is obligated to preserve your life, protect your life at any cost. So, allowing right to die with dignity runs into a contradiction here. It runs into a conflict with the state's interest to preserve life. So, the Supreme Court has made it very clear in the Harish Rana case that the state's interest in such cases, in such specific cases, should become subservient to right to a dignified death. If a patient is in a terminally ill state, a vegetative state, when no other medical intervention can save that person, there is no point in increasing the agonies, increasing the suffering and the pain for the person and the family. So the Supreme Court has said the state's interest in preserving life should become subservient in those cases so that the person's right to die with dignity can be exercised. So these were the important observations made by the court in the Harish Rana case, and this will set a new landmark and a new precedent in India. So take up a mains question based on this topic. You can expect related questions in polity governance or even in ethics or even as part of society, even an essay paper as well. So we have covered all the aspects related to euthanasia. Now you need to find out in which countries active euthanasia is allowed. So please mention that in the comments below. Coming to the next topic, the Hindu carries an editorial on earthquake zoning in India. Recently, the government of India notified a new zoning standard for earthquakes in the country. Because, see, developing such hazard maps and carrying out zonation of the most hazard prone regions, this is the basic step in disaster management. This is step number one in the field of building disaster resilience. You need to map out the vulnerability of the country to a particular hazard and identify the most prone areas and classify them, categorize them accordingly through a hazard and zonation map. So, such a map will help in disaster planning, in disaster preparedness. You can regulate human activity, you can regulate construction, you can regulate industrial development and infrastructure creation and urban development so that the loss of life, loss of property can be minimized during such disasters. So, last year in November 2025, the Bureau of Indian Standards brought out a new earthquake zonation map of India. See, under the previous earthquake zonation map, which was the source of reference for even the National Disaster Management Authority, we had zone 2, 3, 4, and 5, which were categorized. There were 4 earthquake zones in India. This is something you might have studied in your NCRT books, in your basic geography as well, that India is classified into 4 earthquake zonation zones as per the hazard vulnerability map of India. However, this has now been updated. So last year, based on the earthquake design code of Bureau of Indian Standards, a new seismic zonation map was notified by the government. So you can see that new map, which I've shared here on your screen. It introduced a new zone which denotes the highest risk. Zone 6 was added to the previous existing 4 zones. So almost the entire Himalayan arc stretching from Jammu and Kashmir towards Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, towards the Terai belt, where UP, Bihar share borders with Nepal, Sikkim, and parts of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, and the entire northeast region here. They all came under Zone 6, including the Kutch region in Gujarat, the entire Himalayan arc, and as well as the Andaman Nicobar Islands, which are also seismically very, very active, given its proximity to the Pacific Ring of Fire and the existing prevalent fault lines. The Himalayan arc, of course, is always vulnerable because of the active subsidence which is happening with the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. As the Indian plate continues to dive under the Eurasian plate, it creates a very active seismic zone, one of the most active seismic zones. So this new zonation that was notified last year, it has raised a lot of controversy and opposition even from the government and the private industry. The zonation which was introduced, it added a new category. The highest risk category, Zone 6, was introduced with all these areas across the Himalayan belt in the Bhuj region of Gujarat and Andaman Nicobar being brought under Zone 6. And as per the new standards, any border towns and cities located on these zone lines, they would be categorized under the higher risk category. Let's say there is a town located on the boundary of Zone 6 and Zone 5. Then such boundary towns would be categorized under the higher risk category. In this example which I mentioned, it will be categorized under Zone 6. So when such standards are implemented, This is good for disaster planning. It will provide for better preparedness. Through these zoning standards, you can better regulate human activity. It could be urban development, construction, infrastructure development. All these activities can be better regulated with stringent building codes and standards to minimize the disaster risk. The focus of such zonation is to achieve disaster risk reduction. But however, strict zonation without consulting other stakeholders in a highly populous country like India could hamper growth and development. It could hamper construction, infrastructure development, and urban development. So, this new zonation map that was notified last year was strongly opposed by the government as well, by the private sector and industries as well. See, what was the need to bring out a new zonation map? See, India previously followed the simpler method, the simpler fixed zoning model, who had developed the previous zonation map for earthquakes in India. It had used the simpler fixed model method where probabilistic assessments and simulated assessments are not carried out. But when you look at global standards for earthquake zonation, especially in developed countries, in advanced economies like Japan, for example, Japan faces a very high earthquake risk. So when you look at their zonation standards, they use an advanced model known as PSHA, probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, where they employ probabilities based on simulation. Probability based simulation is run using supercomputers by feeding them with seismic data from the region. All the known seismic data, geological data is fed into supercomputers, which run these models to simulate earthquakes and estimate the risk. And it is basically a probabilistic assessment which is done. This is considered to be much more accurate, much more scientific. That's what most advanced developed countries are implementing. So India also tried following the same standards when the new seismic zone map was introduced and notified based on the new standards of Bureau of Indian Standards in November 2025. But it faced strong opposition within the government and the private industry. Within the government, the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Central Water Commission, National Dam Safety Authority, they all raised serious concerns that if we are introducing such strict zones from zone 2 to zone 6 with strict construction and zoning standards, then this could adversely affect infrastructure development and urban development in the country. See, in India, majority of the buildings that we have, they're already having a lot of violations. Almost 80% of the construction that takes place in India has some or the other form of violation, making them illegal structures. Now, if you enforce such strict standards with increased zonation standards, it will only push construction and infrastructure development into the illegal bracket, and it could even hamper the execution and implementation of essential projects like building of a dam or creation of essential infrastructure or building essential urban infrastructure. Such projects could be hampered and stalled, which could even affect economic growth and socio-economic development. That's why several ministries and organs of the government, they opposed it. And even private industry raised concerns that if you're labeling entire Himalayan arc, entire Andaman Nicobar region and the Kutch region under zone 6 with higher zonation standards, then it would directly impede infrastructure development and urban development. You need to strike a balance between the two. Yes, disaster risk reduction is a top priority. At the same time, development is an equal priority, especially in a large populous country like India, a developing nation like India. You can't compromise entirely on urban development and infrastructure development. There needs to be a certain degree of balance. Because see, though higher standards are expected, if you try to implement the standards followed by developed nations, it will only push more structures under the illegal category. Most builders would end up violating the standards. Your local bodies, municipal bodies will not be able to enforce them, and it'll end up creating another nightmare, a legal nightmare, where majority of the buildings in India would be basically in violation of the zonation standards. So that's why there is a need for a better balance. That's why policymakers, experts, and even institutions, they have opposed this. And based on the opposition, the government has withdrawn the new zonation map. Is that clear? The government has withdrawn the seismic zonation map that was released in November 2025. It has been rolled back by the government for now, and it will consult with all the stakeholders, and it will come out with a new earthquake zonation map. So this highlights the conflict between disaster management and development. There is a need to balance both, just like you balance environment conservation with economic growth, just like you balance climate action with economic development and socio-economic development. Similarly, when it comes to disaster risk reduction, yes, there is a need to focus more on containing the vulnerability, reducing the disaster risk. At the same time, you need to ensure that policies are balanced to provide enough scope and space for development as well. So, based on the opposition coming from the government and the private industry, the government has withdrawn the earthquake zonation map, and it's going back to the drawing board to consult with the stakeholders and come out with a new seismic zonation map of India. So, please take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. Now, moving on, topic number 3, Nepal's recent elections. Now, this is a topic we have covered a few days ago. So I would not like to discuss each and every detail in this article. There's a related article on page number 18 as well. So now that Nepal has completed its elections, there is a new government in place. A new, young, dynamic prime minister is all set to take over. We need to understand, what does this mean for India? What can India do going forward? Just for the sake of background, Nepal last year witnessed the Gen Z protests in 2025, which was an expression of the anger and resentment of the youth of the country against the corrupt politics in Nepal. It was a rejection of the traditional political parties in the country. See, Nepal has gone through a lot of political instability, as I've explained in one of my previous sessions. Just last week, I've explained in detail the suffering of the people of Nepal when the monarchy was there, when the civil war occurred as a result of the Maoist uprising, and the complete instability since 2008. Though there was a new constitution in 2015, Nepal never had a full majority government in place. And traditional parties like Nepali Congress, which has been perceived as a pro-India party, and the communist parties like Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist faction, which led the insurgency in the 1990s. Then other factions of the Communist Party, such as Unified Marxist-Leninist, the UML faction, headed by controversial leaders like KP Sharma Oli, the former Prime Minister of Nepal, known for his anti-India views and pro-China sentiments. All these traditional parties, they lost the backing and the support and the favor of the country's youth. As Nepal's citizens have suffered because of decades of underdevelopment, decades of administrative neglect, it had created a lot of frustration and resentment, which burst out last year in the form of Gen Z protests. This was a rebellion against corrupt elite politicians and their political parties. So, in the elections that were held, which was much awaited from India's perspective, all the traditional parties have lost the elections conclusively. Nepali Congress has come in the second place, followed by the communist factions, the Maoist and the UML faction, meaning all the prominent major parties have been sidelined and kicked out by the electorate. They have placed their faith in a new party, in a new leader, the RSP, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, headed by an unlikely leader, Balen, also popularly referred to as Balendra Sharma. Balen was previously an engineer turned rapper, musician who gained a lot of popularity on Nepal social media. Most of his songs as a rapper was anti-establishment. That's how he rose to popularity. His songs were politically loaded, and he would take a direct aim at corrupt politicians and the elites in Nepal. And this struck a chord with the youth. So in 2022, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party was born, a new political party in Nepal. And Balen, he eventually became the mayor of Kathmandu as an independent candidate. In 2023, Balen Sharma became the mayor of Kathmandu, the capital city, and this itself was a shocker for all the traditional ruling elites and the old political parties. So, following the Gen Z protests, as Nepal was preparing for fresh elections, the mayor of Kathmandu and the young popular leader joined this new political party called the RSP, Rashtriya Swatantra Party. So, since the Gen Z protests, Nepal was brought under an interim regime, an interim government headed by a former judge, Sushila Karki. This interim government paved the path for free and fair elections that were held just a few days ago. Now the counting has been completed and the final results have been delivered. See, Nepal has a complex parliamentary system. It's not as straightforward as that of India. In Nepal's parliamentary electoral system, you have first past the post voting system, just like India, where direct voting takes place, where people vote their representatives to the parliament. And it also has proportional representation. So few seats are for proportional representation, few seats are for first past the post system, where simple majority is required to win the particular constituency. So out of those seats which were opened for direct elections, 165 seats. In Nepal's House of Representatives, there are 275 seats in total, out of which 165 they fall under first post the past the post category where direct elections are held. For the remaining 110, they are kept aside for proportional representation. Out of the 165 seats, the RSP headed by Balen has clearly swept the elections with more than 5 million votes going in favor of the new leader and the new party. The other old traditional parties like Nepali Congress and the Communist parties, they are many votes behind, many miles behind the RSP. So it's a decisive win. But however, this creates some new challenges for Nepal. A party like RSP and a leader like Balen, they do not have the administrative experience, right? They may have popular backing. They do have popular support without a doubt. But do they have the experience and the maturity to not just focus on Nepal's own development, but also to manage the complex relations of Nepal with India and China? Because in Nepal, there's always a strategic competition between India and China, which I explained in my previous session as well. So right now, India's approach will have to be very simple and straightforward. The writers, they are presenting three basic steps that India can focus upon to ensure that we remain influential in Nepal. Because see, Nepal is strategically very crucial. It's a Himalayan country sandwiched between India and China, right? India has cultivated Nepal as a buffer state to act as a security buffer against any possible Chinese aggression. So, first and foremost, India will have to respect the people's mandate. See, we need not shape the narrative. We need not be bothered about who comes to power, who gets elected. This should not be the business of Indian diplomacy. India has done very hard to stay away from any such unnecessary interference. Even in the recent Bangladesh elections, we have discussed this. Right? India allowed the things to play out on its own. And India is comfortable to work with anybody who gets elected with popular support. That's the best form of diplomacy. Keep your interference minimal. Because there is a temptation in geopolitics to intervene in other countries, especially in small countries, to try and manipulate elections, to try and back one leader against another, one party against another, hoping that your interests will be protected. But such strategies have always backfired for everyone. For any country carrying out such interference, the strategy has always backfired. And India has that bitter experience with Nepal itself. In the past, India has been accused of excessive, unnecessary interference in Nepal's politics. And this has always worked in favor of China. So India has realized that excessive interference will not work. And today we are more than willing and open to allow natural politics to play out in our neighboring countries. Let the people decide. Let them elect the government they want. India will respect that popular mandate. We will learn to work with that regime, that leader, whoever comes to power. That is exactly what India is doing. We have done it with Maldives as well, right? Despite Mohammad Muizu being clearly anti-India and pro-China, India managed to cultivate Mohammad Muizu and his party over the last couple of years. Now we are trying to do the same with Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, and its new leader Tariq Rahman. Just yesterday, we discussed how India has helped Bangladesh by supplying diesel through the India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline. So with Nepal, India would like to maintain its distance from the politics. People have given their mandate. The government is going to be sworn in. There will be a new leader, new administration. India will respect this mandate and we will learn to work with the new administration. Now, instead of exerting overt influence, India would do better by pushing subtle influence. Subtle influence can be best created through investments by taking up high impact projects which can serve India's interests and also genuinely help the people of Nepal. See, India has actively been involved in hydroelectric projects in Nepal. We have been involved in road and rail projects. India has also funded construction of schools and hospitals. We have backed rural development initiatives. We have taken up cultural projects where we revive Hindu temples, Buddhist shrines, which is part of our cultural diplomacy. So the writers believe that such subtle soft power initiatives focusing on connectivity, infrastructure development, better economic linkages, better people to people relations, this is something which will leave behind a lasting impact and it will automatically create a subtle influence for India which will protect India's interests. Because Nepal is one country where we have seen anti India sentiments being quite strong between 2008 to 2025. Now, finally, we need to break this cycle. We need to end the cycle of anti-India sentiments. Especially parties like Communist Party of Nepal, the Unified Marxist-Leninist faction under KP Oli, has been primarily responsible for festering the anti-India sentiments. They opened up the old border issues over Kalapani and Susta dispute. Under KP Oli, multiple challenges came up where China became more prominent and India was losing influence. So India would do better to work with any regime, any party, any government which comes to power, any leader, and focus on subtle investments, create that subtle influence through infrastructure development, connectivity projects, and people to people relations. Because see, Nepal has a lot of economic dependency on India. Nepal has very close cultural links with India. That is something India would like to explore. And India will not shape the narrative. We will not try to shape the politics of Nepal. That's a futile exercise. Rather, we'll work with what's available. Right? Whoever comes to power will learn to work with them, respect the mandate of the people, create subtle influence, and thus protect India's influence and interests. So, this, according to the writers, would be the better approach for India. Now, coming to the next topic, Iran has carried out a major escalation in the ongoing conflict with US and Israel. Over the last 24 to 30 hours, there have been disturbing reports coming in from the Persian Gulf that Iran has started launching targeted strikes on commercial ships. See, Iran had already partially blockaded the Hormuz Strait. which had disrupted the movement of crude oil supplies. At the beginning of the war, Iran had struck one of the commercial vessels which was trying to cross the Hormuz, and it had imposed a sort of a partial blockade at Hormuz Strait. This had affected global oil supplies, global oil prices were getting disrupted, creating concerns regarding energy security, even for countries like India. But remember, we've discussed that India was in a relatively safe space because we do have sufficient strategic reserves and buffer which can help us last at least 2 months, even without any fresh supply of crude oil. Plus, India is already looking to diversify. The US has given a waiver, right? Which, of course, raises a different complicated question on India's energy autonomy and foreign policy autonomy, which we will discuss in a short while. But the US waiver to India would essentially allow India to pick up Russian oil, which is stranded at sea. See, I understand US is nobody to give permission to India. But unfortunately, India is caught in this dilemma, in this situation where it has essentially allowed US to dictate terms in some ways with regard to our tariff and trade arrangement. And US is urging India as well to step out into the oil market, start picking up more Russian oil, because it will help stabilize global oil prices and supplies. Though India doesn't allow its autonomy to be compromised in general, we are seeing such unfortunate developments. But the thing is, for crude oil supplies, India would always find alternatives. Despite the fluctuation in prices, the prices again came back slightly as well over the last few days. So, with regard to crude oil supply, India was still fine. But now, the hit on commercial ships and the disruption of LPG supplies is something which is causing global panic and alarm. And across India, there's a lot of concern which is spreading. Now, targeted strikes on commercial ships, which might be carrying energy supplies, which could be carrying crude oil, petrochemical raw material, or gas. This is something which will further create instability in the energy markets, and it could have a devastating impact for not just for the region but for the entire world. So we are indeed staring at an unprecedented crisis in the energy market, where countries are already panicking and they are almost entering into sort of a lockdown mode to restrict activities so that they can save up and conserve the limited supplies of energy. So this level of supply chain disruption is the worst case scenario that was expected out of the conflict involving US, Israel, and Iran. So India's Ministry of External Affairs has condemned these attacks on commercial ships that threatens energy supplies and the global energy security. Now, Iran has even threatened to target financial institutions in West Asia. Now, this could open up another Pandora's box altogether, because see, West Asian countries are major financial hubs, especially places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, etc. Even cities like Doha, Kuwait. These are financial nerve centers, not just of the regional economy, but of the global economy. And Iran is now looking to take aim at the financial centers and institutions. So this comes as a retaliation as US and Israel have stepped up their war against Iran. The port city of Bandar Abbas has been almost decimated by the constant US Israeli bombardment. So this war triggered by US and Israel, now being fought back by Iran with everything it has got, it has raised the dangerous prospect of completely destabilizing energy and gas and oil supplies. Now, all the big powers are contemplating a naval task force which can guard and protect the Hormuz Strait and escort the vessels out and deal with the Iranian threat. So, European navies under the EU Naval Task Force, they are already coordinating with US and the others to come up with such a plan to try and deploy naval assets. Probably India might join that initiative as well, or India might decide to operate independently. But very soon, there is likely to be a deployment of naval assets from a coalition of countries, where countries from across the world are likely to deploy their naval presence in order to safeguard the supply routes and deter Iran from launching such blatant attacks. Of course, Iran alone can't be blamed for it. US, Israel share the blame equally for triggering an unnecessary conflict. Now, the whole world stands to pay the price. Now, today in in the newspaper, we have multiple articles focused on the LPG crisis that India is staring at. There's a lot of panic, a lot of rumors, fake news spreading as well. Government is trying to issue clarifications. Some are criticizing the government for not being effective in its communication, right? Some are even blaming the government for trying to hide and underreport the crisis. So let's see what's the real situation on the ground. According to verifiable, credible media reports, not just the Hindu, across media outlets, there are verifiable reports coming in from multiple states reporting a massive shortage of LPG supplies. That is indeed the ground reality. The problem arises because India has one big weakness. India did not create sufficient LPG storage reserves. Despite having a critical dependency on LPG imports and gas imports, we have not created enough strategic reserves and storage facilities. Though we have created this for crude oil, which I've discussed in my previous sessions under the Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Project, India has set up massive underground storage facilities that gives a sufficient buffer for India. Plus the oil manufacturing companies, they also hold on to some stock reserves of petrol, diesel and crude. So this gives India a rough buffer of 60 to 74 days when it comes to crude oil, petrol and diesel. In this regard, we are in a pretty safe space. And as I told you earlier, we can find alternative supplies for this. We can quickly diversify and pick up crude oil from other countries and other sources as well. Not just Russia. There are other sources available as well for India. But with regard to natural gas, we had a critical dependency on Persian Gulf and Hormuz. But despite this, India did not create enough storage reserves for natural gas and LPG. And that is where the problem is coming up. We were living a day-to-day existence, basically. Our reserves of LPG would last maximum 1 to 2 days. That's it. 24 to 48 hours. So if there is a disruption that can last 3 days, the third day in India, you will start seeing a shortage of supplies. And that is exactly what is happening today. After the disruption started, right, all the suppliers, distributors, they've exhausted most of the remaining reserves that were there. And now, though the government is stepping up domestic production and it has invoked the Essential Commodities Act to prioritize allocation and distribution, despite that, we will face a significant shortage for the coming weeks, at least for a month or two, till domestic production picks up and till we source gas from other alternate sources. Yesterday, we discussed that we are looking at US and Norway. Earlier this year, India has signed a deal with US to procure LPG. Norway is looking to supply natural gas to India. But those supplies will take at least 2 months to be delivered. Because of the longer shipping route, you need a minimum of 45 to 60 days to deliver supplies from US to Norway to India. So until then, you need to expect certain hardship in the country. We might even see much stricter restrictions coming into place. See, this is not to trigger any sort of panic, right? But please understand the ground reality. Industries are already taking the hit. The ceramic pottery town, Kurja in Uttar Pradesh, in the Bulandshahr district, which depends entirely on gas supply for producing ceramic pottery ware, has completely shut down. There are hundreds and hundreds of MSME factories that produce ceramic pottery, and they all depend on natural gas. Their work has come to a complete standstill due to the lack of commercial gas supplies. Then similar crisis being reported in Haryana and many other parts of the country. In some countries, there is a shortage of cooking fuel, right? And the commercial supply of LPG and gas is being disrupted for hotels, restaurants, establishments, for big, large commercial events and spaces. But right now, the priority would be household supplies, ensuring that household demand is met. So this is where we look at a related editorial. The editorial is pointing out the two shortcomings of the Indian government to deal with this crisis. One shortcoming is the poor communication from the government. The government initially tried to underplay the crisis, and once rumors took over, fake news took over, then the government has tried to step in. It held a press conference just the other day. but they only gave limited information. They took no questions from the press. So this poor communication, lack of transparency from the government is something which has raised more concern, as it triggers more panic and people will fall prey to rumors as well. The second concern is how India has probably compromised on its energy autonomy by compromising on its strategic autonomy in foreign policy. And according to the editorial, it's not happening for the first time. According to the editorial, the first mistake was made by the Modi government back in 2018, when the first presidency of Donald Trump exerted tremendous pressure on India to cut oil supplies from Iran and as well as from Venezuela. Historically, India had never followed unilateral sanctions. See, prior to 2018, there were American sanctions on Russia, there were American sanctions on Myanmar, there were American sanctions on Iran, but India had never followed such unilateral sanctions. India had always stood up against such unilateral sanctions because India itself was a victim of such unilateral sanctions at one point. So India would only follow sanctions through multilateral institutions like United Nations, for example, through FATF, but not through single country or a group of countries targeting another country. So India understood very well that unilateral sanctions are geopolitically motivated. So till 2018, India would always bypass and ignore such unilateral sanctions despite the pressure and the cost that we had to pay. But in 2018, when the Indian government budged under Trump's pressure to zero out oil imports from Iran and from Venezuela, a new precedent had been created. Meaning India can be pressurized, India can be bullied and threatened to stop its energy trade with a target country of the US. So this was a big compromise on India's energy independence. A country like India can't afford to compromise on its energy autonomy. The choices we make to source oil, gas, etc., this should be entirely our sovereign choice made by our government, not under the pressure of a foreign entity. So this probably created a wrong precedent according to the editorial. This leads us to the second administration of Donald Trump, which has since 2025 targeted India with penalty tariffs to penalize India for buying Russian oil. And the premature trade announcement which was made in February between India and US, where both Trump and Indian leadership claimed to have achieved a big trade deal with the US. Under the trade deal, it appears that India has agreed to cut off buying Russian oil under American pressure. Though India has never confirmed or denied it, the American side has repeated it multiple times, stating that Indians have agreed to not buy Russian oil anymore. Now, see, first of all, the trade deal is not going anywhere. I told you this in February itself, that this trade announcement, the interim trade agreement that was being announced with so much fanfare by both governments, it was unlikely to go anywhere because the finer details were never worked out. There was a lot of mismatch between the statements on both sides, and the signing of the agreement has now been pushed because of the ongoing war, and it's unlikely to materialize. Plus, India was also anticipating the Supreme Court ruling in the US. And as expected, the Supreme Court ruling went against Trump's tariffs. So now the trade deal hangs in the balance. But in the process, what have we gained? Almost nothing. Though the tariffs have reduced on Indian exports, which brings some relief, the problem is you have in a way compromised on your energy independence by sort of committing to not buy Russian oil anymore. And now US says that we are giving a waiver to India. Now you tell me who's US to give permission to India to buy or not to buy from someone. So that makes India look weaker. It essentially compromises on the sources. It complicates your foreign policy decision making and creates difficult choices for your energy autonomy as well. Now, India can tide over the crisis. I'm not saying India can't, but falling under foreign pressure and making such choices where your sovereignty could get compromised could have disastrous consequences. And you're seeing that right now with LPG supplies being constrained. Because see, we have a higher degree of dependency on LPG supplies from the Persian Gulf. Now look at the chart here. The Hindu has carried a detailed data pointer on the LPG consumption, natural gas consumption in the country. You can see how it has increased quite consistently over the years. Majority of the natural gas and LPG which we consume, be it at household level, at the industry level, or at commercial establishments, majority of it comes from imports. Though there is some extent of domestic production, most of it is met through imports. And what's the level of dependency? The level of dependency is to the tune of 60%. Almost 60% of the gas that we use is imported. And out of this, more than 85 to 90% passes through Hormuz Strait. Now that is the vulnerability for India. Out of the 60% gas imports that we are making to meet the domestic demand, more than 85 to 90% is coming from Hormuz Strait, coming from Persian Gulf countries, which is the number one supplier. Number one supplier is Qatar. You can see that in this graph, followed by United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. Then comes US, Saudi, Oman, and the others. These are the top gas suppliers to India. 90% of the gas that we are importing is coming through Hormuz Strait from Persian Gulf. And that is why the ongoing blockade, the disruption, is a serious concern and a serious challenge for India. The Prime Minister has reassured the nation that we will overcome the supply crisis, that you need not panic. But as I said, due to poor communication from the government, the panic has already set in. You go to any shop, ask for a let's say a cooktop or an induction stove or electric stove. It is all completely sold out. The stocks of companies like TTK, Pigeon, and others who produce these induction stove, it has shot up 15% yesterday. And there is a massive demand for alternate cooking fuel. See, India, according to experts, should have anticipated this. Because see, under the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwal Yojana, the government did a fantastic job of introducing cooking gas to households in the country. There are nearly 33 crore registered households using LPG connection. The Ujjwala scheme alone added 10 crore beneficiaries, which itself was a big success of the Modi government. It achieved the objective of reducing indoor pollution, especially using the traditional firewood and even gobar was very harmful, dangerous for women who spend most of the time in the kitchen, particularly in rural areas, which contributed to health related issues, respiratory related disorders, etc. So, shifting such a large part of your population away from harmful fuel and introducing clean fuel that can reduce emissions, reduce deforestation as well, was indeed a big, bold step. And the government deserves full credit for the successful implementation of the Ujjwala Yojana. Right? The government gave adequate subsidies, and the rollout of the scheme, the LPG scheme, was a very big success. But the problem is we should have anticipated a shock. If there is a big jump in demand because of schemes like Ujjwala scheme, don't you think you should account for the supply and what will happen in case of a shortage during a shock event? And that too when we had 90% import dependency on Hormuz. This is where India has fallen short, according to many experts. See, this doesn't mean we don't have any storage facility for gas. We do have storage facilities. There are two underground storage facilities for LPG and natural gas in India. One is in Mangaluru, in coastal Karnataka, which is also a major port. And that's where one of your strategic petroleum reserve is also located. The other one is Visakhapatnam, again a major port in Andhra Pradesh on the east coast. So Mangaluru, Visakhapatnam, They have two major gas storage underground caverns. Clear? This is the location of the strategic petroleum reserves as well. Couple of them are located here. And you also have the gas storage facilities of India located at Mangaluru and Visakhapatnam. But their storage capacity is very, very limited. They can store only 1.4 lakh tons of LPG. You know what is India's daily consumption? Our daily consumption is 80,000 metric ton, which means the buffer that we have is barely going to last for maximum 1 or 2 days. The storage here gives a buffer for India of maximum 1 to 2 days. So we were leading a ship to mouth existence without even realizing. So if gas supplies stop to India for 3 days, the impact will be felt immediately. On the third day, you will see a shortage in India because you will run out of the gas supplies. That is why now the government has invoked Essential Commodities Act as an emergency measure, ensuring that it can take control over the supplies and distribution. It has ordered the oil manufacturing companies and the gas producing distribution companies to step up domestic production on a war footing. And the good news is domestic production is already up by 25% over the last few days. Since invoking Essential Commodities Act, domestic gas production has jumped 25%, but still it's not enough to meet the demand. So unless and until Hormuz Strait is cleared or fresh supplies come from US and Norway, which might take 2 months, the crisis is likely to continue and perpetuate as well. Now, can we plan at least for the coming years and decades to create more storage? Because the natural gas can't be easily stored. It's not that you simply build a underground tank and store it. You need the appropriate right geological conditions as well, where these caverns are required and the right rock structure is needed to help store the gas. According to experts, there are three very preferred locations in India. The most preferred would be the peninsular shield of India, where you have the Archean granite, gneiss, and charconoid type of rock formation located across peninsular India, which is the most appropriate geological condition to store natural gas and LPG. So the current locations, Mangaluru, Visakhapatnam, fall under the same peninsular shield zone. They are located in the peninsular shield. That's why they are most appropriate to host these underground caverns, which are natural structures which are designed to pump gas and extract it when required. And that's why the facilities are located here. The other region would be the Deccan Trap, where you have plenty of basaltic plateau, but it's very difficult to store gas in a basaltic region where rock basalt is found in the Deccan Traps. It's not very ideal. It's very difficult to execute the project. It has been tried along the coastline in the Deccan Trap region where you find such cavern facilities, but it's been a very big engineering challenge for India. The other location is the Bikaner region in Rajasthan, where halite deposits are also seen as conducive for gas storage. Then, apart from this, we also have the KG basin, the Krishna Godavari basin, the Cambay basin, and the Mumbai offshore basins, where salt caverns can be constructed, which are non permeable, right, which don't allow the gas to escape and provide the perfect condition to store gas. So, these are the locations India will have to explore, overcome the engineering challenges, make capital investments to create sufficient strategic reserves of natural gas and LPG. Because when you look at others like European countries have created a buffer stock of 25% of their domestic demand. That is how much the EU has invested, especially after the Ukraine war started, right? They have really focused on creating their buffer because for winter months in Europe, you can't do without gas for heating solutions, especially. So they have created a buffer of 25% of their annual requirement, right? So that is the massive storage capacity that EU countries have built. That is something India should pursue as a strategic objective in the coming years so that we avoid these mistakes. Now, coming to the last big article of today's newspaper, then we just have the prelims section. The government is considering a bill which has been approved by the Union Cabinet. It will be introduced in the Parliament in the budget session, which will basically facilitate IPS deputation into CAPFs, into Central Armed Police Forces. See, recently Supreme Court of India had passed a ruling in favor of officers from the CAPF cadre who had opposed the deputation of IPS officers into various Central Armed Police Forces in the country, be it BSF, CISF, CRPF, NSG, etc. All the top leadership positions are taken up by IPS officers who are on deputation, and the Supreme Court had placed a complete bar on this. The Supreme Court had directed the Home Ministry, which is the cadre controlling authority for Central Armed Police Forces, to stop IPS deputation gradually over the next 2 years and ensure that in-house cadre is groomed. In-house officers are given the organized Group A service category designation, which would place them on par with IPS officers. Because one of the big complaints of CAPFs and other security forces and agencies of India is that the in-house cadre is never allowed to grow beyond a point in terms of promotion. All the key lucrative positions go for IPS officers who come on deputation. They come, join the agency or force for a few years, and they go back to their home cadre. Now they will not build expertise, they'll not have the right motivation. And it becomes a disservice for the in-house officers who have struggled for years, and it affects their morale and motivation. So this has been a fundamental cadre-related problem, an administrative problem in our CAPFs and other central law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies, right? Because there is a very strong IPS lobby which gains control over all the key positions, while in-house officers don't see any career prospects beyond a certain point. So Supreme Court had intervened. It had ordered the MHA to stop IPS deputation altogether and given a time limit of 2 years to gradually phase it out for IGP level postings and above. But the MHA appealed against it. And last year, the Supreme Court struck down the appeal, saying that this order is final. So obviously, the government, the only option is right now to bring a law, bring a bill which can overturn the Supreme Court judgment. So the government has considered a bill, and we will take a look at this later when the further details are available. Right? Once the bill comes into the public domain and once it is placed in the parliament, we will carry out an evaluation of the bill as to how it would affect the CAPFs who are opposed to IPS deputation. What would be the implication for the practice of deputing IPS officers into other security forces and agencies? So it's a key topic under say internal security and as well as public administration, and we will examine this in our coming sessions. Now let's look at the prelim section. Just 4 small articles. We can quickly wrap it up. On page 4, there's a reference to the Garo Hills Autonomous District Council, which is in Meghalaya. This is one of the autonomous district council under the 6th schedule provision of the Indian Constitution. So it enjoys constitutional autonomy. So let's talk about the autonomous district councils quickly. See, the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India provides for constitutional autonomy for tribal areas, tribal districts in the states of Assam, Tripura, Meghalaya, and Mizoram, in the 80 states of Northeast India: Assam, Tripura, Meghalaya, and Mizoram. In these 4 states under 6th schedule, autonomous district councils are set up with a constitutional status which gives them extraordinary autonomy, administrative autonomy, financial autonomy, some amount of judicial and executive autonomy as well, so that they can reduce dependency on state government and central government. They can protect their tribal land and forest and resources, and they can protect even their tribal customs and practices. So there are 3 such autonomous district councils in Assam. Then we have 3 such autonomous district councils in Meghalaya, 1 in Tripura, 3 in Mizoram. Now, can you find out the location of all the 10 autonomous district councils under 6th schedule and mention that in the comments below. That's your second homework for today. Find out the names, the location of all the 10 autonomous district councils which are set up under 6th schedule of the constitution, which enjoy the constitutional status. So in these autonomous districts, the district councils are elected for a 5-year term. 30 members will be part of the autonomous district council, with few of them nominated by the governor of the concerned state. The governor of these states also gets few discretionary powers to promote tribal welfare and protect tribal rights. And remaining seats, around 26, would be open for free and fair election for adult franchise, where the tribal community would cast the vote and elect one of their community members to be part of the autonomous district council. And it'll have a term of 5 years, and they essentially enjoy a degree of administrative, legal, judicial, and executive and financial autonomy. They can levy some local taxes, manage their forest land, manage their rights over forest resources, protect their tribal customs, protect their practice with regard to faith, inheritance, marriage, etc. Because some of the societies here, tribal societies, are matriarchal societies as well, right? So since there's no uniform civil code, it basically creates a flexibility to satisfy the demands of forest dwelling tribes and indigenous communities in Northeast India. And it has been a tool to basically resolve conflicts, to resolve insurgencies as well. Because many of these communities, some of them were fighting for a separate state. Some of them were fighting for more autonomy. Some of them were looking to lead a separatist movement to break the region from India as well. So, 6th schedule has been a very powerful constitutional tool in the hands of the government to resolve the conflicts and address the resentment by showing this flexibility within the ambit of the Indian Constitution. Next, on page 12, a lioness from the Gir National Park, which had ventured outside of the protected area, has killed a young boy in Gujarat. So this brings up the question of the Asiatic lion. The Asiatic lion is found only in Gujarat. It's the only remaining natural habitat of the Asiatic lion, which once roamed vast tracts of land from Indian subcontinent to today's Iran and Pakistan. But now it's restricted just to the Gir National Park. And according to the latest census, 2025 census, the lion population has increased significantly due to better conservation efforts. There are more than 891 lions which have been counted, and they are in a very small protected area. So because of the reduced space and habitat, lions are venturing out into neighboring villages and districts. Some lions have even entered the coastline, the Saurashtra coastline, which itself is a very rare occurrence to spot lions on beaches. So this is increasing the chances of man-animal conflict around the Gir National Park in Gujarat. So in this context, note down the basic details about Asiatic lion, Panthera leo. On the IUCN Red List, it's listed as endangered. It's a highly threatened species due to loss of habitat, hunting, poaching, etc. And it's listed as endangered, and it gets highest protection on the CITES Convention, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, where it's listed in Appendix 1, meaning the trade of the animal product is completely prohibited. It enjoys the highest legal protection in India as a Schedule 1 animal under Wildlife Protection Act. And please be aware of its historical range. Historically, it was spread across parts of South Asia and West Asia region. From the Arabian Peninsula, what was the then Turkish Persian empires, which is today's Iran, extending till the Gulf region, including Saudi Arabia, towards Pakistan to central India. This is considered as the historical range of the Asiatic lion. But today, the only remaining natural habitat is the Gir National Park in Gujarat. Now coming to the next topic. The International Energy Agency has convened a high priority meeting of all the member countries to decide upon releasing the largest ever reserve oil into the global markets. Given the crisis perpetuated by the Iran war and the shortage of oil expected, right, with Brent crude crossing $100 and coming back again, it's been very volatile with oil prices. So to stabilize the prices and the supplies, International Energy Agency is calling upon the members to release massive quantities of oil from the strategic reserves that they have held. The last such release was during the Ukraine war, when the Ukraine war had caused a similar disruption. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, had pushed the member countries and associate members to carry out a big release from their strategic reserves so that the supply could be restored and the mismatch in the market could be addressed. Now, it is looking at a release of nearly 400 million barrels worth of oil into the market, which is going to be the biggest ever release of oil from strategic reserves the world has ever seen. During Ukraine war, around 182 million barrels of oil were released into the market. That itself was seen as the biggest ever release from strategic reserves. So now, given the scale of the crisis because of the Iran war, IEA is contemplating the release of 400 million barrels of oil into the market, which is going to be the biggest ever release from strategic reserves from across the world. So, what is this International Energy Agency? The IEA is based out of Paris. It's an autonomous intergovernmental organization set up in 1974 following the Gulf oil crisis of 1973. So, to deal with any such oil supply shock, primarily developed Western countries, US and European nations, under the OECD framework, they created the International Energy Agency as an intergovernmental organization to focus on energy markets and come out with data analytics and also coordinate with countries to manage energy supplies. So these are the member countries. I've shared the entire list. There are more than 30 member countries, as you can see, from Australia to United States. But India, please note down, is not a member. We are not a full-time member of IEA. India is a association country, like an associate member. We are part of International Energy Agency, but not as a full-time member, but as an association country. So India has welcomed the decision of IEA to release more oil into the market from strategic reserves. Coming to the last topic for today, on the supplement page, there is another environment-related topic focusing on increasing incidents of man-elephant conflict, especially in the state of Assam, where elephants are frequently venturing into tea plantations, resulting in loss of life, injury, loss of crop. And there are incidents of humans attacking elephants back out of anger and revenge, which harms our biodiversity as well and threatens the elephant population. So the entire article is focused on managing man-animal conflict. But what caught my attention was the mention of one organization known as WWF. WWF is working with the Assam government and forest department to manage the man-animal incidents occurring because of the high density of elephant population in Assam. The WWF Worldwide Fund for Nature, it's a non-governmental organization. It's a global NGO based out of Switzerland. It's headquartered in the city of Gland, which is in Switzerland. It works closely with organizations like IUCN, with UN-related bodies and organizations as well. It will assist governments across the world, national and provincial governments, to focus on biodiversity conservation. So this organization was set up in 1961, and the Living Planet report, which is published once in every 2 years, is its flagship report. So please make a note of the Living Planet report. So on this note, I bring my session to an end. I hope it was a useful, interesting session. If you benefited, please let us know through your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.